Before we begin, hit subscribe. Because some prisons don't just lock men inside, they lock the truth away forever. The gunfire started before sunrise. September 13, 1971. Attica Correctional Facility, upstate New York. Fog rolled low over the prison yard, and the cold morning air carried screams across the concrete walls. Inmates pressed against metal bars, shouting, praying, crying. Some held white cloth through the windows. Others stood frozen, knowing what was coming. Outside, hundreds of state troopers moved into position. Helmets, shotguns, gas masks. Orders shouted through radios. The prison yard looked less like a correctional facility and more like a battlefield. And in the center of it all stood inmate David Harris, his hands raised, his heart pounding like a drum in his chest. For 4 days, the prisoners had taken control of Attica. For 4 days, they had demanded one thing: to be treated like human beings. Now, the state had come to answer. And the answer was violence. A helicopter roared overhead. Tear gas dropped from the sky. White clouds exploded across the yard. Men coughed, collapsed, ran blindly. Then the shooting began. David hit the ground. Bullets cracked through smoke and panic. Men screamed his name. Guards shouted. Bodies fell. He saw one hostage collapse beside him. Then another. Blood mixed with rainwater and dirt. Someone grabbed his arm. Run. But there was nowhere to run. Only walls. Only smoke. Only death. And in that chaos, David saw something he would never forget. A correction officer standing near the gate. Not firing. Watching. Calm. As if he had expected all of this. Officer Thomas Grady. And in that moment, David understood something terrifying. This was not just a riot. Someone had wanted this to happen. The gunfire echoed again, and the yard disappeared into madness. 3 days earlier, September 9, 1971, Attica was already a prison before the riot began. But for the men inside, it felt like something worse. A place where time stopped, where silence became punishment, where hope dried up faster than water in summer. David Harris had been there for 6 years. Armed robbery, 12-year sentence. He was 28 now, older than when he entered. Harder, too. But not broken. Not yet. Every morning began the same way. Steel doors. Cold trays of food. Guards barking orders. 1 shower a week. 1 roll of toilet paper a month. Letters delayed. Medical care ignored. Men packed into tiny cells like forgotten boxes. And always, always, the feeling that nobody outside cared. David sat in the mess hall beside his closest friend, Leonard Price. Leonard was older, 42, smart, calm, the kind of man people listened to without him asking. He slid a newspaper clipping across the table. David read the headline, "Prison Reform Demands Ignored." He sighed. Another promise. Leonard nodded. They keep promising because they think we'll stay quiet. David looked around. Men eating in silence. Eyes tired. Faces angry. They might be right. Leonard leaned closer. No, not this time. There had been tension for months. Complaints. Petitions. Meetings. Nothing changed. The guards grew harsher. The inmates grew louder. Everyone felt it. Something was coming. Even the walls seemed to know. That afternoon, David was assigned laundry duty near one of the older cell blocks. That was where he first noticed Officer Thomas Grady. Grady wasn't like the others. He didn't yell much, didn't joke, didn't threaten. He watched, always watching, like a man counting pieces on a chessboard. David saw him speaking quietly with Deputy Warden Collins. They stopped talking when he passed. Too fast, too nervous. David kept walking, but the feeling stayed. Later that night, Leonard found him in the yard. "You look like you saw a ghost." David lit a cigarette. "Maybe I did." He told him about Grady, about Collins, about the strange silence. Leonard listened carefully, then said something that made David uneasy. "Some men profit from chaos." David frowned. "This is prison. Everybody profits from chaos." Leonard shook his head. "No, I mean bigger than that." He lowered his voice. "There are rumors, missing reports, beatings never investigated, money disappearing from prison contracts. David stared at him. You think staff are involved? Leonard looked toward the towers. I think some people don't want anyone asking questions. Before David could answer, shouting erupted near Block C. 2 inmates were being dragged by guards. One was bleeding from the mouth. The other kept yelling. He didn't do anything. No one moved. No one helped. Because in Attica, helping could get you buried. David clenched his fists. Leonard grabbed his arm. Not now. But anger had already entered the room. And once anger enters a prison, it doesn't leave quietly. The next morning, everything changed. A simple mistake, a locked gate, a misunderstanding. That's how history likes to disguise itself. A group of inmates believed one of their own was about to be beaten by guards. They rushed. Guards panicked. Someone hit the alarm. Doors opened, then closed. Then chaos. Men flooded the corridors, shouting, running, metal clanging. A prison built on pressure had finally exploded. David found himself pushed into the center of it. Inmates took control of the yard. Hostages were taken. Guards surrendered. For the first time in years, the prisoners were not powerless. And for the first time, the state was forced to listen. David stood beside Leonard as hundreds of inmates gathered. Some angry, some afraid, some shocked by how fast everything had happened. Leonard climbed onto a table. His voice cut through the noise. We are men, not animals. We want rights, not revenge. The yard answered with cheers. For a moment, it felt possible. Negotiators arrived. Reporters watched from outside. The nation listened. Demands were written. Better conditions, medical care, fair treatment, religious freedom, an end to abuse. Nothing impossible, only dignity. David believed maybe this could end peacefully. Maybe. Until he found Leonard's cell empty. No note. No warning. Gone. He searched everywhere. Kitchen, yard, medical wing. Nothing. Finally, an older inmate named Ruiz pulled him aside. His face was pale. Stop looking where people can see you. David's stomach turned cold. What happened? Ruiz glanced toward the administration offices. I saw Officer Grady take Leonard last night. Quiet. No witnesses. David felt the world shift. Why? Ruiz whispered. Because Leonard knew something. David stared toward the locked basement beneath the old administration building. A place inmates talked about like a myth. Records stored there. Punishments hidden there. Things that officially didn't exist. Ruiz grabbed his shoulder. If Grady took him there, pray you're too late. That night, while the prison waited for peace or war, David slipped through the dark hallway toward the basement door. No guards. Too quiet. He found the old metal entrance locked. But not fully. Just enough to make someone think no one should enter. His hands shook as he pulled it open. The smell hit first. Cold air, rust, and something worse, something human. He stepped down into darkness, and when his flashlight found the floor, he froze. Because Leonard Price wasn't alone. There were files, photographs, and another body, a prison guard, dead for days, and pinned to his uniform was a note with David's name on it. David's hands trembled as the flashlight beam shook across the basement floor. Leonard Price lay against the wall, barely moving, his face bruised, his breathing shallow, but alive. Beside him, sprawled across the cold concrete, was the body of Correction Officer James Nolan. His uniform was stained with dust and blood, his badge hanging loose from his chest. Pinned to that uniform with a rusted nail was a folded note. David stared at it, his own name written across the front. For a second, he couldn't breathe. The prison above still roared with chaos, shouting, alarms, boots running across metal walkways. But down here, in the basement of Attica, it felt like the world had stopped. He stepped closer. Leonard. A weak sound escaped Leonard's throat. Don't touch the note. David dropped to his knees beside him. Who did this? Leonard's lips were dry. His voice barely worked. Grady. Collins bigger than we thought. David looked at the dead guard. Officer Nolan had been one of the few guards who treated inmates like people. Quiet. respectful. He never joined the beatings. Now he was dead. And somehow David's name was tied to it. He carefully pulled the note free and opened it. Inside, only one sentence was written. If they need a killer, give them one. No signature. No explanation. But David understood. Someone wanted him blamed. Someone wanted the Riot to bury the truth. Leonard coughed hard. He found the records. Nolan did. Financial records. Abuse reports. Missing complaints. Grady was helping Collins cover it all. David frowned. Cover what? Leonard's eyes filled with anger. Deaths. Beatings. Money stolen from prison contracts. Men disappearing from isolation cells and never being reported. David looked around the basement. Old filing cabinets. Boxes stacked to the ceiling. Dust everywhere. A graveyard of secrets. This place. Leonard nodded weakly. This is where they bury the truth. Before David could respond, footsteps echoed above. Heavy. Fast. Someone was coming. Leonard grabbed David's wrist. Take the files. If they catch you here, it ends. David hesitated. I'm not leaving you. You have to. The footsteps got louder. Voices now. Guards. David shoved files into a laundry sack. Documents, photographs, signed reports. Proof. Maybe enough to expose everything. He turned back. Leonard forced a painful smile. You always wanted a way out of Attica. David's throat tightened. This wasn't what I meant. Leonard whispered. Then make it mean something. The basement door slammed open upstairs. Flashlights cut through darkness. David ran. He moved through service tunnels beneath the prison, clutching the sack like it was oxygen. Every sound behind him felt like death. He knew if Grady found him first, there would be no trial. Only another body no one explained. Above ground, the uprising was changing. Negotiations were breaking down. The prisoners were losing hope. Governor Nelson Rockefeller refused to come. State officials stalled. Tension spread like fire. In Diard, men argued. Some still believed peace was possible. Others wanted war. David pushed through the crowd until he found inmate leader Marcus Bell standing near the center. Marcus was respected, feared, and exhausted. He listened as David explained everything. The basement. Leonard. The dead guard. Officer Grady. Deputy Warden Collins. The hidden files. Marcus opened one folder. His face changed. This is real. David nodded. More than real. This is why they won't negotiate. They're not protecting the prison. They're protecting themselves. Marcus stared toward the guard towers. If this gets out, they lose everything. Marcus exhaled slowly. Then that's why they'll never let us leave here alive. The words hung heavy. Because everyone already suspected it. Now they knew. This wasn't just about prison reform anymore. It was about survival. Marcus gathered the inmate representatives that night. Rain tapped softly against the broken windows. The yard smelled like fear. David stood beside him as the files were passed around. Evidence of fake reports. Medical neglect. Violence hidden from inspectors. Money stolen from supplies prisoners never received. One older inmate read silently, then whispered, My brother died in isolation 3 years ago. They told my mother it was suicide. He looked up with tears in his eyes. He was right here in these reports. They lied. No one spoke. Because suddenly, this wasn't politics. It was personal. Marcus turned to David. What about Leonard? David looked down. He's alive. For now. And Grady? David's voice hardened. He knows I found it. Marcus nodded. Then he'll come. He did. The next morning, under a white flag, Officer Thomas Grady walked into the negotiation zone with 2 officials beside him. Calm. Controlled. Like a man attending a business meeting. David watched from behind the crowd. Grady's eyes found him immediately. No surprise. Only recognition. Like they were both finally done pretending. A civilian negotiator began speaking about peace, demands, hostages. David barely heard it, because Grady kept looking at him. Then, quietly, while others argued, Grady stepped closer. Just enough. His voice low. You should have stayed in your cell. David stared back. You should have stayed out of that basement. Grady smiled slightly. You think those papers save you? They save the truth. Grady leaned in. No, David. They bury you with it. Before David could answer, Grady said something that froze him. Ask yourself this. Why was Officer Nolan wearing your name? David's chest tightened. Grady stepped back. Because he trusted the wrong inmate. Same mistake Leonard made. Then he walked away, and David realized the worst part. Grady wasn't afraid. He was certain. Certain that when the state came, nobody would care about files. Nobody would care about truth. Only control. Only blame. Only bodies. That night, the prison changed again. The sky was dark. Too quiet. Snipers moved into position outside the walls. Troopers gathered. Vehicles lined the road like an army preparing for war. Inside the yard, the inmates felt it. The silence before violence. David sat beside one of the hostages, Officer Frank Simmons. Frank was older, tired, and strangely calm. Unlike others, he had spoken honestly during the uprising. He looked at David and asked, "You think they're coming tonight?" David answered without looking up. "Yes." Frank nodded. "They won't care who gets hurt." "No." Frank sighed. "I told them that." There was a long silence. Then Frank said something unexpected. "James Nolan was my friend." David turned. Frank continued. He was gathering proof. He trusted Collins once, then realized what was happening. He wanted to expose it. David felt cold. "He told you?" Frank nodded. "He said if something happened to him, Grady would make sure the wrong man paid." David whispered, "That man is me." Frank looked at him carefully. "Then don't let them write your ending for you." Before David could respond, alarms screamed across Attica. Red lights flashed. Shouts erupted from every block. Men ran toward the fences. The assault had begun. Tear gas canisters landed first. White smoke exploded across the yard. People coughed, screamed, stumbled. Then came the gunfire. Loud. Relentless. Chaos swallowed everything. David grabbed the sack of files and pulled Frank down behind concrete cover. Bullets tore through the yard. Hostages screamed. Men dropped. Smoke blinded everyone. And through it all, David saw Officer Thomas Grady walking through the madness. Not hiding. Not running. Walking straight toward him. Gun in hand. Calm as ever. Their eyes met through the tear gas. Grady raised the weapon. And David realized this was never about the riot. It was always about silence. And now, inside the blood and smoke of Attica, only one of them was leaving with the truth. The tear gas burned David's eyes so badly he could barely see. The prison yard had become a storm of smoke, shouting, and gunfire. Men were running in every direction. Some were trying to help the wounded. Others were simply trying to survive. The walls of Attica, once meant to keep people inside, now felt like the walls of a trap closing shut. David crouched behind a low concrete barrier, clutching the sack of files against his chest. Beside him, Officer Frank Simmons struggled to breathe, covering his mouth with his sleeve. Across the yard, through the white cloud of gas, Officer Thomas Grady kept walking forward. Slow, steady, gun raised, like a man finishing unfinished business. David looked around. There was nowhere to go. No safe corner. No second chance. Only one choice left. Face him. Frank grabbed David's arm. "Don't be stupid." David looked at him. "If I run, he burns everything. Leonard dies. Nolan gets blamed forever." Frank's face was pale. "And if you stay?" David gave a bitter smile. "Then maybe somebody finally tells the truth." Another shot cracked through the air. Concrete shattered beside them. Grady was getting closer. David stood. The noise of the prison faded for a second. Just him. Just Grady. Two men walking toward the center of a nightmare. David stepped through smoke and broken glass. Grady stopped 10 feet away. For the first time, they were alone. No guards. No inmates. No witnesses. Only truth. Grady spoke first. "You should have taken the easy way. Blame the riot. Survive." David stared at him. "You killed Nolan." Grady's face stayed calm. "Nolan made himself a problem. And Leonard." Still breathing. For now. David tightened his fists. All this for money? Grady shook his head. That's what people like you never understand. It starts with money. Then it becomes power. Then power becomes the only thing that matters. He stepped closer. This prison runs on fear. It always has. Men like Collins and me, we kept it working. David's voice hardened. By burying people? Grady answered without shame. By controlling chaos. David lifted the sack of files. No. By creating it. For the first time, Grady's expression changed. Slight irritation. Because he knew those papers mattered. Not to the bullets flying around them. Not to the governor. But to history. To truth. To the families who had been lied to for years. Grady raised the gun fully. You think anyone will believe a prisoner? David looked him straight in the eye. They'll believe the dead guard. They'll believe the records. They'll believe the bodies in your basement. For a moment, Grady said nothing. Then he smiled. A cold, tired smile. They'll believe whoever survives. The gun fired. David moved. The shot missed, hitting concrete behind him. He lunged forward, slamming into Grady. They crashed to the ground. The gun skidded across the yard. Fists. Elbows. Blood. Years of rage poured into seconds. Grady was older, but stronger than he looked. He slammed David against the pavement. You were supposed to disappear. David hit him back. No. You were. Nearby, troopers shouted orders. More shots. More smoke. The prison was still collapsing around them. But for David, the world had narrowed to one man. One choice. One ending. Grady reached for the gun. David saw it first. He grabbed the sack and swung it hard. Files exploded into the air. Paper everywhere. Reports. Photographs. Names. Secrets flying like snow across the prison yard. Grady froze. For the first time. Fear. Because the truth was no longer hidden. Troopers were watching. Hostages were watching. Inmates were watching. Pages landed at their feet. Officer Frank Simmons staggered forward, coughing, shouting with everything left in him. Those files. Read them. Nolan was murdered. Grady did this. The yard shifted. Confusion spread. A state trooper picked up one of the papers. Another looked at Grady. Questions. Doubt. And in systems built on silence, doubt is dangerous. Grady looked around and understood. It was over. Not the riot. Not the blood. But his control. His secret. Gone. He made one final move for the gun. But this time, he never reached it. Troopers tackled him to the ground. Hands behind his back. Shouting. Steel cuffs. Officer Thomas Grady, the quiet man who watched everything, was finally the one being watched. David fell to his knees. Exhausted. Shaking. Alive. Rain began to fall. Soft at first. Then harder. Washing tear gas from the air. Washing blood into the dirt. Around him, men cried. Some for freedom. Some for loss. Some because after 4 days of fear, they were still breathing. But survival did not feel like victory. Too many bodies lay in that yard. Too many names would never leave Attica. Leonard Price was carried out alive. Barely. He would testify later. So would Frank Simmons. Deputy Warden Collins resigned within weeks. Then came the investigations. The reports. The hearings. The denials. The truth came slowly, like all difficult truths do. Officially, the uprising ended. But for the families of the dead, it never really did. Years passed. David Harris was eventually released. Not quickly. Not easily. But he walked out of Attica with gray in his hair and silence in his eyes. Reporters asked him the same question every time. Was it worth it? He never answered right away. Because how do you measure the cost of surviving a place built to erase you? One autumn afternoon, years later, he stood outside the prison walls. Older now. Free. The towers still stood. Cold. Silent. Like they remembered everything. A young journalist approached him. She held a notebook and nervous hands. Mr. Harris, people still argue about what happened here. Some say it was a riot. Some say it was a massacre. What do you call it? David looked at the walls. At the windows. At the ghosts that never really left. Then he answered. I call it proof. She frowned. Proof of what? He looked at her. That when people are treated like they don't matter long enough, eventually, the world hears the noise. She wrote that down carefully. Then asked one last question. Do you think justice was served? David gave a long, tired smile. No. He turned to leave. But truth survived. Sometimes, that's the only justice you get. He walked away from Attica, without looking back. But just before he reached the road, he stopped. Because, in the distance, beyond the prison gates, he heard shouting. Construction workers. Police cars. Yellow tape. Another body had been found during renovations. Old bones. Hidden beneath a sealed section of the basement. And attached to the remains, another forgotten prison report. Another missing name. David stood still. The wind moved cold across the yard. Attica was still speaking. And some prisons never stop confessing. If you think this story was intense, you're not ready for the next one.